Walk past the lion enclosure, past the gift shop selling $7 stuffed giraffes, past the ice cream stand with a line 11 people deep. And you think, this place must be swimming in cash. It is not. In fact, the zoo you're standing in right now might be losing money every single hour it stays open. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why owning a zoo might be one of the most financially punishing businesses a person can enter, and why some people do it anyway. Let's start with the animals, because that's where most people assume the money goes. And they're right, but not in the way you'd think. You don't just buy a lion and put it in a cage. You can't walk into a marketplace, point at a tiger, and hand over cash the way you would for a used car. Most zoos don't even buy animals anymore in any conventional sense. They're loaned, traded, or bred through cooperative breeding programs between accredited zoos worldwide, designed to keep genetics diverse and species alive across generations. It's essentially a global lending library, except instead of books, it's tigers, and instead of late fees, there are six-figure transport invoices and international paperwork thick enough to fill a filing cabinet. Because loan doesn't mean free. Insurance alone can be staggering. You are insuring a living, breathing, multi-ton asset that can die of stress during a 2-hour drive, an asset that cannot be replaced by simply reordering from a warehouse. Then there's transport itself. Climate-controlled crates built to exact specifications for each species, sedation protocols managed by specialized traveling vets who monitor vital signs the entire journey, customs paperwork if the animal is crossing international borders, health certificates from multiple regulatory agencies, and sometimes armed escorts for larger predators being moved through populated areas. A single elephant transfer can run into 6 figures before the animal has taken 1 STE. If Part 1A covered what it costs to acquire, transport, feed, and house a zoo animal, this part covers something visitors almost never think about at all: the enormous, invisible cost of keeping that animal alive, healthy, and safe, year after year. Because an animal doesn't just need food and a habitat. It needs an entire ecosystem of human expertise surrounding it every single day, and that ecosystem is where a huge share of a zoo's budget quietly disappears. Start with veterinary care, and this is where the numbers start to feel almost absurd. Zoos don't call a vet when something goes wrong. They employ entire veterinary teams, on-site, full-time, because a sick giraffe can't exactly be driven to the nearest animal hospital. And even if it somehow could be transported, most hospitals have no idea how to run an MRI on a 2,000-pound patient, or how to safely anesthetize an animal whose exact tolerance for a given drug has never been studied in detail. These teams need species-specific expertise spanning dozens of wildly different animals, custom medical equipment scaled for creatures ranging from hummingbirds to hippos, and a pharmacy stocked with medications that would look bizarre on any human prescription pad. Surgery on a large predator might require an entire team simply to manage anesthesia safely, because the margin between sedated enough for surgery and dangerously oversedated can be razor-thin in species we still don't fully understand. Add specialized diets formulated by full-time nutritionists, because feeding a snow leopard the wrong ratio of fat to protein can shorten its life by years, and because animals in captivity are prone to a completely different set of nutritional deficiencies than their wild counterparts, who forage across hundreds of square miles rather than eating from a prepared bowl. A nutritionist's job at a zoo isn't a luxury position. It's closer to a preventative medicine department, quietly stopping health crises. When we left off, we just tallied up the brutal cost side of running a zoo. Animals that cost 6 figures just to transport, habitats that run into the tens of millions, veterinary teams, nutritionists, and a staff that never stops working even on the slowest, emptiest day of the year. Now let's flip to the other side of the ledger and ask the question that actually matters. how does a zoo make any money at all? And the answer will surprise you, because it's almost never the animals themselves generating the profit. It's everything built around them. Ticket sales are the obvious answer, but here's the twist that catches most people off guard. For most zoos, general admission barely covers a fraction of daily operating costs. A family of four might pay $80 to $100 to get in, and that sounds like meaningful money, until you realize the zoo is also paying wages to keepers, vets, groundskeepers, security, education staff, and administrators, all before a single peanut is sold or a single soda is poured. Attendance revenue is necessary, but it is rarely sufficient on its own. Some zoos calculate that ticket sales alone cover less than half of daily operating costs, which means on any given day, a zoo could be completely full, gates packed, parking lot overflowing, and still technically be losing money if nothing else happens after the visitor walks past the entrance turnstile. That single fact reshapes everything about how a zoo actually has to think about its business. The real money is in what happens after you're already inside, past the point of no return, emotionally and financially committed to the day. This is the part that every theme park, stadium, airport, and cruise ship has learned too. And zoos apply the exact same psychology. Once a visitor is paid to get in, they've already committed, and that's precisely when the real revenue engine kicks in. Food and beverage margins at a zoo can be enormous, because you have a literally captive O. The money made from a single visit, food, merchandise, parking, premium encounters. This part covers something entirely different, the long game. Because the single biggest mistake in thinking about zoo economics is assuming every visitor is a one-time transaction. The zoos that actually thrive financially have figured out something the one-time ticket model completely misses. The real value of a visitor isn't what they spend today. It's what they spend over the next 5 years. That brings us to membership. And this is the quiet financial backbone of most successful zoos, even though it looks, on the surface, like the zoo is deliberately leaving money on the table. A yearly membership might cost less than the price of 3 single visits, which sounds like a discount that actively hurts revenue, until you understand what it's actually buying the zoo in return. Members come back constantly, sometimes weekly, which means far more cumulative food and gift shop purchases over the course of a year than a one-time visitor would ever generate in a single trip. They bring friends and extended family who then buy full-price tickets, effectively turning every member into an unpaid marketing channel. And critically, members are far more likely to donate when asked directly, because they've already emotionally invested in the zoo as their place, somewhere they return to regularly, rather than a one-time attraction they visited once on a family vacation years ago and never thought about again. Membership isn't really about the entry fee at all. It's a loyalty and donor pipeline disguised as a discount program, and the smartest zoos treat it that way internally, tracking membership revenue not as lost ticket income, but as the very top of a much longer, much more valuable funnel that stretches years into the future. A family that joins as members when their child is 4 years old might still be visiting, donating, and eventually volunteering when that. So far, we've covered 2 enormous sides of a brutal equation. Costs that never stop, attached to a revenue engine built from food, merchandise, memberships, events, and viral baby animals that still, more often than not, isn't quite enough. Which raises the real question at the heart of this entire series. If the math is this punishing, how do the world's most successful zoos not just survive, but actually thrive, year after year, decade after decade? The answer lies in a part of zoo economics most visitors never think about at all, and it fundamentally changes the nature of the entire business. Many of the most successful zoos in the world are technically nonprofits, and that single legal and financial distinction rewires the entire model underneath everything we've discussed so far. A for-profit business exists, at its core, to generate returns for shareholders or owners. Every decision ultimately gets measured against that goal. A nonprofit zoo exists instead to fulfill a mission: conservation, education, species preservation, public access to wildlife that most people will never otherwise encounter in their lifetime. And that mission-driven identity unlocks a completely different funding stream that a typical entertainment business simply cannot access in any meaningful way: philanthropy. Wealthy donors fund entire exhibits, sometimes contributing millions of dollars in a single gift, sometimes literally getting their name permanently attached to the building or the habitat itself as a form of lasting recognition. Corporate sponsorships pay for specific animal enclosures in exchange for branding and long-term goodwill, similar to what we discussed in Part 2b, but often at a much larger scale when it comes to funding an entire new habitat rather than sponsoring an existing one. Estate gifts and legacy donations, written into wills years or even decades in advance, can fund conservation work long after the original donor has passed away, creating an income estate. The difference between a zoo that merely survives on donations and government support and a zoo that genuinely thrives. And that distinction almost always comes down to one specific mindset shift that separates the two categories completely. The zoos that thrive financially, consistently, without leaning entirely on donor goodwill just to break even, are usually the ones that stopped thinking of themselves as a place with animals and started thinking of themselves as an experience company that happens to have animals as its main attraction. This single reframe changes almost every operational decision that follows from it. This shift in mindset changes everything about how the business is actually run day to day. Night events with lights, music, and after-hours animal viewing become a genuine second revenue stream layered on top of daytime admission, as we touched on back in Part 2b, but the thriving zoos take this concept much further than a single seasonal event. They build entire calendars around it. Seasonal light festivals during winter months when animal activity and attendance would otherwise be at their lowest point of the year, Halloween-themed evening events that repurpose existing pathways and habitats with minimal new investment, and members-only evening previews that reward loyalty while generating additional foot traffic through the gift shop and food stands we detailed extensively in Part 2a. Overnight camping experiences inside the zoo grounds represent another example of this experience company mindset in action. Families sleep in tents set up near the lion enclosure or within earshot of nighttime animal sounds. And this experience sells out consistently at a premium price point that has essentially nothing to do with the actual animal feed costs we calculated back in Part 1a, and everything to do with the sheer novelty and exclusivity of the experience itself. A family isn't really paying